Morning, everyone. Good to be with you up here in Joburg. Thank you for opening your hearts to us. I have heard really good reports of what's happened this week. I must admit, when we got given this topic, I was like, any topic but this one, hey? Leading together. That's quite an interesting one. But what we're going to do, Justine's going to kick us off for maybe half the time, and then I'm going to share a few thoughts thereafter. I think it's a really exciting and important topic to cover. So hopefully by the end of it, there'll be some stimulated thought, and we can take it from there. Is that all right? This is my wonderful wife, Justine. We've been leading in Durban, one of the One Life churches, for 7 years. And we moved from Maritzburg after 25 years there. We moved down to Durban, and that was in 2015, 2016. We've got three wonderful boys, and they're very much part of what we're doing there in Durban, and very grateful to God for being in that city. This is Justine.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. It is really wonderful to be with you all this morning, and I hope to hear more of your stories throughout the day, but well done on being here and just being obedient to the Lord, and just trust that we'll hear many adventures and wonderful things that God is going to do in and through everyone here. But yes, so we're looking at this thing of ministering together, and today I just want to cover four basic points that might be obvious, that might be clear, but for me it's things that actually personally, in a marriage there's two people. That's our marriage as a mystery, because God says we're one, but there's two of us, and so we each have a responsibility, we each have a role, we each have some part to play. And today I just want to look at four things that I think individually we can look at and take ownership of. And so I'm going to kick off by reading a scripture from 2 Samuel 23, verse 8. If there's some hectic names here, I'm just going to say maybe that guy or whatever. So I'm going to go straight into it. 2 Samuel 23, verse 8 to 12. It says, "These are the names of David's mighty warriors. Joshab, someone or something, was the chief of the three. He raised his spear against 800 men, whom he killed in one encounter. Next to him was Elzara, son of Doda, the Ahohite. As one of the three mighty warriors, he was with David when they taunted the Philistines gathered at Pas Damian in battle. The Israelites retreated, but Elzara stood his ground and struck down the Philistines till his hands grew tired and froze to the sword. The Lord brought about a great victory that day. The troops returned, but Elzara, what have I said to her? Only until they were all dead. Next to him was Shammah, son of Agi the Harite. When the Philistines banded together at one place where there was a field full of lentils, the Israelite troops fled from there. But Shammah took his stand in the middle of the field. He defeated it and struck down the Philistines, and the Lord brought about a great victory that day." Now you might ask me, Justine, what on earth does this scripture have to do with marriage and ministering together? Well, I want to say to us, and I'm sure you all are very well aware of that, ministry is actually we face many battles in ministry. And in ministry as a couple, you are going to fight battles together. And in ministry, you are also going to fight battles on your own. And I want to encourage us today. These men were all very much part of David's team. They all had a major role to play, and they all stood their ground. They played their part, they did their thing, and they were involved in this team, being very effective for the Lord. And I want to encourage every single one of us here this morning that the most important team that you will ever be a part of, the most important team that has the biggest weight, is not your eldership team, it's not your deacon team, it's not your apostolic team, it's your marriage team. It's that team. If that team is not strong, if that team is not working together, if that team is not having victories together, advancing together, standing together, fighting together, feeling together, then it's very difficult for the other teams, the eldership team, the deacon team, our church team, the teams around us to flourish. And so with that in mind, we're going to just be looking at this relationship of our team member, myself and my husband, you and your spouse. And the first thing that I want to say is that you need to know your core. Here in David's team with these mighty men, they knew what they were good at. That guy knew that he could take that sword and he could fight and fight and fight for such a long time that his hand froze to the sword itself. And today I want to ask you, do you know your call? Do you know the thing that God has called you to, the gifts that He's put inside you? And I know I'm speaking to the converted here, but I've found so often in my journey of marriage that there be moments where I've lost what am I called to. Before Mark and I got married, I got saved at the age of 13 and just into this church that was going and serving Christ passionately. And before long, I was leading a connect group. And then I left school and I was leading our student ministry on the campus. And then I married Mark and I handed over my connect groups and I joined Mark's connect group and I handed over leading the student ministry and Mark and I were leading the 20s. And suddenly I was like, what is my role? Like, my role is to support Mark and blow wind into sales. And I love doing that. But I found myself like, what must I do? Like, I can pray for him and I can do all these things, but where do I fit in and how am I going to do this? And then not long later, I had children and I was so busy, like, keeping these babies alive. And in all of that, I was thinking, there's this deep thing that, God, I know there's something that I'm meant to do for you that goes beyond these borders. And so I'm talking to the wives now, maybe specifically, but even to the men here, is that we need to know the gifts that God has called us to, and we need to lead confidently in those areas. And just to say that when we are on this journey together, communication is absolutely vital. I cannot expect Mark, although he is the most amazing leader and he loves me and he knows me, I cannot expect Mark to hear from God what I'm called to. I cannot expect Mark to open every single door for me, although he has often said he would open any doors that he can for me to walk in the things of the Lord. But it's also my responsibility. It's my responsibility to go before the Lord and say, God, what is it that you're calling me to in this season? And I think that different seasons require different things, but we need to own it ourselves, find that calling, and then we need to talk about it. I'm feeling in this next season, I need to run at this and that, and maybe it takes a bit of adjusting, maybe it takes a bit of not now, maybe later, but it's communicating and it's owning what are the things that you are called to. John 15 verse 16 says, you did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit. It is not the role of our husbands just to bear fruit, and it's not the role of our wives to just bear fruit. We are called to bear fruit together, and we're also called to bear fruit alone. Some of my fruit looks different to Mark's fruit, and that's okay. And I think that in marriage, we need to work out what is the fruit, what are the areas that you're called to bear fruit in. And it might be something that's behind the scenes, writing letters, sending messages, encouraging people. It might be something that's public, like sorting out decor, running ladies' groups, charging men for men's breakfast, whatever it might look like. It's going to be different. And we need to learn to work together to make sure that his fruit is flourishing and growing, and that my fruit is flourishing and growing, and that the things that we do together are flourishing and growing. The second thing that I want to say is that we need to know what it takes to keep you healthy. You need to know what it takes to keep you healthy. Again, there were many years that Mark and I were married where I just expected that he would take care of me, and that, he would wash me with the word, and I had times with the Lord, and I did my thing. But I have been on a journey over the last couple of months where I've really found the Lord challenging me on, Justine, you need to take care of you for the future, for your husband, for your children, and for the church. And it's been an interesting journey to go on. It hasn't always been the easiest, but last year Mark got very sick, and I know in a session later he's going to deal a little bit with that. But it was a year of lots of pressures, lots of things going wrong. And I felt the Lord with me so closely. There were so many encounters where God spoke so incredibly into my spirit, strengthening me. And yet I got to the end of last year and I was exhausted. Beyond exhausted. I was so tired. And in chatting to Mark, he said, why don't you go and chat to this one friend of mine? She's a psychologist. And he said, why don't you just go and have one or two sessions with her? And I thought, I'm just going to do that. And before I went to her, I thought, what am I even going to say to her? Like, it's so obvious. I had a hectic year. My husband almost died. I mean, I'm tired. What else can you say? But as I started to think about it, I realized, sure, this happened and this happened. And I realized that throughout the year, not only had I encountered hard things, and that happens in life, we all encounter hard things, but I'd started carrying a load. I got offended with one or two people and the way that they had interacted with me and my family, and I had started carrying this load. And I realized that it was a load that was separating me from living healthy, from living free, from living in everything that Christ had for me. We've just looked this last weekend through the book of John, chapter 2, where Jesus enters the temple. You know that story. He's so angry. He's so mad. He flips over the tables. He chases everyone out because they are disrupting what that temple, the purpose of that temple was for. And the thing that made Jesus so angry was that those animal traders and those temple money exchanges were hindering people from getting into the presence of God. And anything that hinders us from getting to the presence of God, Jesus, his anger burns at that thing. He wants to remove it from our lives. And it was like I just realized that these offenses and this unforgiveness that I was carrying was having such a huge effect on me physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and it was stopping me from getting into the presence of God. And I went on like a few weeks journey of just unpacking this load that I had been carrying. And I went into 2023 this year feeling as light as a butterfly. I can't explain it any other way, but as light as a butterfly. And that is how Jesus wants every single one of us to walk into our futures, not carrying heavy loads, but free and available to run at the things that he has. But it takes time for us to get to know ourselves. And I want to encourage you, men, women, you've got to take care of you. You've got to know the things that tire you out. When you take rest, you've got to know what is it that you're resting from. You've got to know, how do you rejuvenate yourself? How do you rejuvenate your marriage? How does your wife rejuvenate herself or your spouse? We've got to learn these things about us in order for us to be strong and run this race till the end, not just for a few moments. The third thing that I want to just say is that we need to know who the enemy is. We know this. The scripture says that the enemy prowls around like a hungry lion, looking at who he can devour. And we are going to kill ourselves if we think we're good, we're strong, we've got this, or we'll just wait until the holidays, when we go on leave, and then we'll sort this out. Friends, I want to encourage you that every single one of us, we have got to be on our guard and protect our marriages. And I want to encourage us today is that we need to guard each other. We need to guard each other in the way that we communicate about our spouse. It's so easy when you're with a group of people and they're being fun and games and they're just tuning about their wife, they're just tuning about their husband, and it actually is quite funny, but it actually also is a bit dishonoring. And I think as leaders, we are called to set an example and to set a tone of honoring and covering our spouse's weaknesses and covering their nakedness. And it's a great thing for us to learn. A couple of weeks ago, Mark and I were in a counseling session, and he was sharing some things, and he was saying some of the things that I had gone through. And in that session, I actually felt like very exposed. I didn't know this couple very well, and normally I'm very chilled, and I'm an open book, and I'll tell you anything. But in that moment, I actually felt really exposed. And afterwards, we were just chatting, and I said, I want to be that open book, but in that moment, it was hard for me. I felt exposed. And Mark was so apologetic. He said, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize that. But I realized of myself is that many years ago, I would have been like, I really don't like the way that Mark has spoken in this session. But anyway, and I'll just bury it. And the thing is that if you just bury it and you bury it and you bury it, Mark doesn't realize that actually that was maybe a little bit too much of exposure for me. So he never learns. He isn't intending to hurt me. He isn't intending to expose me. And I end up maybe potentially carrying grudges or going into meetings now think, oh gosh, I hope he doesn't say this or I hope he doesn't say that, and living insecure. And I think as couples, we need to guard each other and we need to make sure that we communicate. That thing makes me feel exposed, or this thing makes me feel like this, and not to live sensitive and like we walk on eggshells. God's called us to run and be courageous, but to communicate and to guard each other radically. Also want to just say, and this is very obvious, but you're on the same side, right? often I get this picture of like a tennis court, and like Mark and I might be having a little disagreement, and then I realize, I'm on the same side. Let me just run around to his side. We're actually fighting the enemy here. It's not Mark versus me, it's us versus the enemy. And so it's really important for us to realize where the enemy comes in, how he comes in, and that we need to guard ourselves against him. And the last thing that I want to say is that we need to know that there is a here and a now. And I want to encourage every single one of us. We want to do ministry and our marriages till the day that we die, being passionately in love with each other, being absolutely radically committed to each other. And if we're going to be like that, I really believe that we need to take moments here and now. We need to seize opportunities. We need to make memories. It's so easy to get caught up in the busyness of serving and loving and laying our lives down for everyone here, there, and everywhere, that we can forget that the most important team member, the most important person in your life is right next to you, and it takes investment. We lay our lives down for so many other people, so many other causes all the time, but we need to make sure that we are investing and laying our lives down and putting in to our marriages more than any other area, because this is the area that takes us, this is what qualifies us. This is the thing that people can look at and say, okay, they're still in it. They still love each other. This is the picture of Christ and the church, and that's what we are representing here. Mark and I, recently, we've tried to just redeem time. So often Mark will have a meeting at 8, and we drop the children off at 7, and I'll say, where are you going? And he'll say, no, he's going here. I'm just going to come and grab him. Maybe sometimes I get 15 minutes with him. Maybe sometimes I get 20 minutes with him, or half an hour, but just trying to redeem and invest and put in. And I know that this morning I've covered probably very general things and things that all of us know and we live out. But I want to encourage you that your spouse is the most important person that you will ever do ministry with. And so it is so important to take time to make sure that you're investing, that you are guarding, that you are taking care of, and that it is well between the both of you. I know that there are definitely seasons of up and down and sideways, but you're on the same side of the tennis court. Fight for each other. And I really believe in this world today that it's our marriages that are going to scream to the lost, to the lonely, and those people that need Christ. So go for it.
We should end it there, huh? That was really good. Some of what Justine said will overlap with what I'm going to say. We didn't prepare together, we just prepared. So that's all right. We got married 16 years ago. I think I was 25, Justine was 21. She had just come out of university, and I was in ministry already. I was on our eldership team and had just gone full-time. And so Justine came straight out of university onto a full-time team and into full-time ministry. And I say that because it was a very different picture to what the average person has, actually. And we've had to really grow and learn in our marriage. But in saying that, we've got our different picture for us. Everyone's got their context that they've had to learn and face and work on. And there's no excuse, actually. Before God, He's given us all the tools that we need to make sure that our marriage can work for the ministry that He's called us to. And one of the things that we had to work really hard on, I think, was our reference point in terms of doing ministry. So we're talking about leading together now. There's a few different models of leading together. There might be a predominant leader within a marriage. There might be a very silent person that is an ally, that's praying, that's supporting, etc. There might be two very dominant personalities in a marriage. Most marriages say we're both very dominant. One's just very loud, one's quiet. But there's natural conflict that happens in marriage because we're so different. But our reference point was different from a ministry point of view, I guess, because in my world, I had my dad and my mom. My mom was a very high achiever, a very capable lady. She was German, and she got straight A's in matric. She was very eloquent and was top grades, etc. My dad passed matric on a remark. He was a really lovely man, but he had this picture in his mind, and they try to work out their marriage that actually it was male dominance, and so she was trying to submit herself to this all the time, and it was just carnage throughout our upbringing. Incredibly godly family, lots of action though. I'll just put it out there. Lots of humility and forgiveness and saying sorry and tears, and it was just interesting to watch. So that was one reference point. Another reference point had to do with Ray and Moira Oliver that led the church, and Ray was very much the mouthpiece, and we didn't hear too much from Moira, but she was very present. And then Grant and Sue, who lead One Life Church as a whole now, Sue really doesn't enjoy the microphone. She does it, but she's a lot of fun and is the perfect foil for Grant Crawford, who's like a Duracell bunny. That was our reference point, and then we end up getting married, Mark and Justine. And so you look at your reference points, and very often subconsciously we try and emulate what our reference points tell us to be and do. And we found out very soon after that actually, shucks, this isn't us. We are so different, and it's just not working, whatever we're trying to do here. And so it took us quite a bit of time in ministry to find our feet. And then particularly when we came down to Durban, again, it was like another shock when we really at the forefront of leading a church now. I think it was different to being on an eldership team because you're right at the front line. But I want to share 8 thoughts that will be quick that have really spoken to me. It says in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, it says, "A man shall leave his mother and father and be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." The goal of marriage is what? It's oneness. The goal of your marriage and my marriage is that we would be one. And so whenever there's division, whenever there's disagreement, I often say this to Justine, is that we've got to fight for intimacy here, because that's God's goal, that we would be one together. So in leading together, God's intention for you as you lead with your spouse is that you would lead as one, but that has outworkings. Being one doesn't mean one dominant and another not. It has expression, it has color to it. And here are the 8 thoughts that I've got. The first thought is this, it's similar to what Justine said, but what has God called me to do that only I can do? I think it's an important question, that, and it's not always overly apparent, because it might be a seasonal thing. What has God called me to do now that only I can do? And how's this for scary? Maybe my wife disagrees with that. So I feel like God's called me to do X, Y, and Z, but when we have a discussion about it, she says, well, I actually feel called to that same thing. Then a discussion is needed. But the discussion is needed to allow the dust to settle so that when we know what we're called to, we can do it with conviction and we can do it with authority. Does it make sense? So, for example, you've seen Justine preach. She is a far better preacher and communicator than me. She's an amazing leader. She's an amazing person. But in our early years of marriage, it wasn't quite like that. We had 3 kids that were unplanned under the age of 3. That was not fun. I'm just going to put it out there. It was hectic. And what we had to discuss early on is, what has God called me to do and what has God called her to do? And if God has called her to do X and me to do Y, let's settle on those things, because it makes life in ministry a lot simpler. It doesn't let me off the hook on certain things and let her off the hook, but that's where we landed. And where we landed was that she was going to be at the coalface with the kids for that little period, and happily so. And it had to do with making of food and various other things. I had a very big leadership role at our main sites. It was a preaching role. It was a visionary role. And for that season, that's what God called me to do. It was very important to have that conversation. So I hope you get what I'm saying. When we understand what God's called us to do, we can do it to the glory of God, we can do it well, and we can do it unapologetically. The second question that I think is important to ask, and this is of your spouse, is what has God called your spouse to do that fulfills his or her purpose and brings them joy? Sometimes it might not be immediately apparent what God's called them to do, but a good indicator of what God's called them to do has got to do with this thing called joy. Look for the joy in ministry. Look for the joy in life. Look for the joy all over them. Look for the grace all over them. And that's a very good indicator that that's part of God's purpose for their life. I think when we look at how God's wired man and woman, it's very likely that what God's called you to do and what God's called your spouse to do is very different. And the genius of how God puts it together is that He takes that difference and He weaves it together into oneness, and it actually creates color in the picture. And that's what I love about it. When we understand the purpose of our spouse and what brings them joy, my role then is to ensure that she flourishes or that he flourishes for the ladies. And to ensure that if they can stay in their lane, it creates joy for them. And when they're ministering out of joy, it's good for all of us, right? It's good for the family. It's good for the church. A healthy me, a healthy you is good for the people around you. So sometimes we overwork, we overdo things in an effort to say we've got to get it done, and we detract from what's good for us, not realizing that actually if I just take a bit of the pressure off, delegate, give it to someone else, and take a bit of time out for my own health, when I'm healthy, I'm good for people, and that's good for them. Okay, another thought for us to consider, number 3, how do we lead together is to understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. Again, very simple, this thought, but I think we might agree with this. It's most easy to pick up on your spouse's weaknesses. Okay, I'm the only one agreeing with myself here. Okay. Why is that? Because her strengths are the things that attracted me to her. They become part of everyday life. They become like common as change. It's the expectation of just how we do life together. But when on the off day she has a weakness, it's glaringly obvious to me. And I can often just jump on that thing. And it creates frustration and it creates division, and intimacy goes. We had been ministering for, I think, 10 years together. And one guy came to do one of these personality tests with our eldership team, that StrengthsFinder tool. And many of us would have maybe had a look at it and done it. But it was actually a real juncture in our marriage. For 10 years, we had been puzzling around various things, doing life and ministry together. And that day was like revelation from on high. Because Justine's StrengthsFinder said one thing about her. Her number one strength is achiever. Achiever means she loves to achieve. So she loves a to-do list. So she loves to every day look at her day and say, what can I achieve today? I don't always have that kind of energy. If you've achieved climbing Mount Everest yesterday, it doesn't matter, because today's a new day. I want to achieve again. And so we'd go on holiday and I'd be spent. Like, geez, I've given my life, poured myself out, etc. We're on holiday. We don't want to wake up early. We want to take it easy. We don't want... And Justine would say every single holiday day, what's the plan? What's the plan? What's the plan? What's the plan? And it used to frustrate me, and we would just miss each other on these kind of things. When we understood these little strengths and weaknesses, I was viewing it as such a weakness, but in understanding it as it's one of her top strengths, the fact that she loves to achieve, and those things are now aimed toward, shucks, what about giving Justine a mountain? So in terms of a lot of the events that we run at church, not just in Durban, but across our church, Justine's at the forefront of it, because she just looks at a Mount Everest and says, I can do this. No problem. And it's a wonderful thing that a weakness that was perceived in my eyes has actually turned into a wonderful strength that we can celebrate. Does that make sense? A fourth thing I want to say is simply understand the gravity of your marriage and ministry. We don't believe that your gifting and your charisma and your wisdom is what qualifies you to minister, right? We believe that your character and your family and what happens in the home qualifies you to minister. And so if that's the case, where the kids are at, where the family's at, where my marriage is at is actually quite important. And the gravity of ministry is such that if the enemy can destroy one thing about you, I reckon he'll choose your marriage. Why is that? Well, I've seen marriages that have stuck through bankruptcy and they come out weak but with the glory of God all over them. Because actually, there's a limp and there's weakness, but there's unity there in marriage. I've seen people that have experienced incredible health problems, but they've stuck together in marriage, and the glory of God is all around them. But where the enemy comes to attack marriage, if marriage breaks down, it affects everything. It affects your job, it affects your kids, it affects your mental health, it affects your future, it affects everything. And so that's not to put the fear of God into us, but I think as Justine has said, marriage is like a garden that needs to be well tended. And if you're the type that says, well, I don't really like gardening, my suggestion is change your likes, because it's not going away, the garden. And God's intention is that it would be well watered, it would be pruned, it would be beautiful. And it's not just for you to enjoy. In ministry, this is the reality, is that people, they take from your garden subconsciously. I heard an amazing story, which again I was going to share later, but I'll share it now, which I thought it's so interesting. I was very sick last year, and I stopped preaching because I couldn't, my balance was all over the place, and to be honest, to prepare a sermon was really tough. But I loved the church, and I loved being at church. And I would sit in the front row and I'd do my bit, and every now and again I'd lead a meeting. But I love worship and I love music, and I don't find it hard to worship God. So let's worship. Put your hands in the air and worship the King of Kings. And I heard a story of a lady in a small group that said this. She said, I woke up on Sunday morning, and to be honest, I was a bit lazy to go to church. I didn't really want to go to church. But then the thought struck me, if Mark can get up and get into the front row and raise his hands to heaven, what excuse do I have? I thought, that's very telling comment, that. Because it's the subconscious, subliminal part of leadership that we don't even think about. It's the same with your marriage. I think it's good for couples, men and women, to show and demonstrate affection in ministry. Put your arm around your wife every now and again in the front row. You're not in ministry mode, and then I love my wife afterwards. You can enjoy her company. You can hold her hand. You can give her a kiss hello. And I say that to myself because my wife said to me the other day, I'd really love it if you had to greet me with a kiss. It's okay. Is that all right? Marcus is going to fix this all in a moment. We realized when we moved to Durban that if I had to trawl back over 16 years of marriage, I think our hardest year of marriage was the year that we started leading in Durban. So that's not to scare people off leading churches, but it was just the gravity of you're at the forefront now, and you get the flies and the bugs first, and actually the enemy's there. What's our posture in kind of coming against that? Our posture is one of prayer. And our posture is one of actually understanding that some of these attacks that come when it's between a husband and a wife, it's not me against her. It's actually the enemy trying to divide us. Okay, let's keep moving. Point 5. I think for some of the husbands, if God's called you to protect your wife, we can guard our wives and our children from what I've called unnecessary pain and stress of ministry. Guard your wife and your children from that. This is what I've learned. There's enough pain and stress of ministry that's coming that you can't guard them from. Why expose them to everything? That makes sense? So Justine, when we started out, I remember her saying, she's a boots and all kind of girl. I want to be involved in everything. And we had one of these really governmental meetings where something was going down. It was pretty hectic. And she was keen to be involved and came in. And at the end of the meeting, she said, actually, I don't think I want to be involved in that going forward. She actually felt sick to the pit of her stomach. It was just really hectic. And from then till now, she's been very happy to say, no, you do it. That's been quite helpful, actually, to have that conversation, because she's saying, I don't need to go into those spaces for unnecessary pain. My son said to me 2 days ago, he says, you have got the best job in the world. I'm like, I've had cancer twice, my bad. I didn't say this, but it's been pretty hectic. He thinks I've got the best job in the world. He says, look at what you do. Look at our lives. We go to school. We play sport twice in a day. We only get home at 6 o'clock at night. Then we got to do homework, everything. You sitting on the couch on your phone. I'm like, yeah, I'm sending messages. I'm working. You don't see what I do during the day, etc., etc. But I actually thought to myself, it's a wonderful statement that, because in his mind, he doesn't associate ministry with pain. He doesn't associate ministry with stress. He associates ministry with, if I wanted to do anything in my life, I'd want to do that. Crazy kid. The thing about that day also that was so funny is that, how's this for 4 stories that had happened within like a 48-hour period? One guy comes forward. He says, I've broken all the 10 commandments. I want to get baptized. I'm dealing with that. I'm like, are you saved? He's got out of Westville prison. He's not saved. He gets saved. He gets baptized. The next week, he's serving, and now we're doing this big project, and he's a chef at Greyville Racecourse, and he's preparing a whole lot of pies to give to the poor. That's all within a 2-week period. But that's just one of the instances. There's another guy who's been in a homosexual relationship for 7 years and doesn't know how to get out, and he's never told anyone, and he has a meeting with me on that same day to say, how do I do this? Okay, there's another guy who says, my dad, he's 72, he served the Lord his whole life. His wife has just died, and he's fallen in love with a lady out of the rural parts that is 36 years old, and he's 72. What do I do with that? Okay, that's another story, same day. And then there's another couple that have said, we want to get divorced. That was my day of ministry, and at the end of it, my son said, you got the best job in the world. Guard your wife and children from unnecessary pain. Keep the picture full of color, because it is. I want to say that ministry, all of those really difficult situations with these people have all resulted in wonderful transformation, and that's why we do ministry. To see people set free and to see them alive. Point number 6. I've said this, find the thing that connects your spouse to you, not you to your spouse. Leading together, it's one of the things I've had to really learn for myself. There's some things that Justine does in my world that really connect me to her. If I'm watching sport on the couch and she says, hey, would you like a cup of coffee? I'm like, honestly, this is a beautiful wife. It's just like that simple for me. But the reality is that I'm finding things that connect her to me. But what about what's important to her that creates connection for her? And these are the things that I've had to learn about Justine. On a Monday, which is our day off, she's a lady of routine and quite enjoys exercise, getting up early, going for a run, etc. I'm generally quite spent on our Monday off. But I've realized it's been such a great investment to go and drop the kids off together and to go and have a run on the promenade and then to have coffee together. Do I want to every Monday morning? I can say emphatically 150%, absolutely no. But I've learned that actually that creates connection for Justine to me. And that's a really important thing, I think, in terms of leading together. The 7th thing that I want to just say, and maybe it's a bit contentious, but we've really found this to be effective in our own marriage and ministry, is that dividing and conquering can be very effective. And what I mean by that is that I don't know whether we've always got to, oneness doesn't mean that we've always got to lead together everything. What I see this is like the train is God's kingdom that is forcefully advancing, and He wants to use your marriage. And sometimes we say, well, the train track is us together, but it's actually just one line. And God says, hey, imagine it could be 2 lines. That's a proper train track. And Mark's going to be one line, and Justine's going to be another line. You connect it together, and the kingdom forcefully advances. Now, you might say theologically, where are you at? Don't worry, Marcus is coming. But this is what we've learned. We're a team together, but we're both strong leaders. So we actually thrive when we're communicating well together, but she's leading her environment, I'm leading my environment, we're touching base, we're communicating well together. There's no jostling for position, but it's dividing and conquering. Silly example, on a Sunday morning, do we have to talk to the same couple together? Or is it possible that she can touch the crowd and I can touch the crowd, and actually we touch base at the end of the morning and say, hey, who did you chat to? What is the story? We've touched double the crowd as opposed to we just have to do it all together. It's just a thought. The eighth and final thing. This is something that has been a weakness of mine, and I think it's because I'm quite confrontational maybe, and in terms of my thinking and my articulation of my feelings and those kind of things, I'm quite quick on the draw, and I'm quite solution orientated. Justine, when it comes to her articulating her feelings and what's under the surface, she takes a bit of time to process. So we've had this marriage that's been going on, and we've been trying to find each other on various things, and sometimes we've done really well at it, and other times maybe poorly. But this is the lesson, is listen to your spouse. Just learn to listen to your spouse. Without an agenda, with a blank page, listen to your spouse. And Justine touched on it from last year, but last year she was in quite a bad space at the end of the year, and I became aware of the fact that you got a patient that is facing huge mountains, and it just all seems like it's here, but there's actually the patient's support system that's also going through stuff. And I actually didn't quite know what to do and how to help her. And then we had that conversation about, why don't you go talk to someone? And she came the one day and she said, you know what, I've done this exercise of what I'm going to say, and that was the day that I chose to listen. And at the end of our conversation, it became apparent to me that last year, Justine went through, she said, I distilled it down to 12 traumas that she faced. And they were hectic traumas. I get emotional thinking about them. Just like, some of them were like day episodes, but that had long-reaching effects. Some of them were like, just the whole thing was a trauma. But 12 traumas, and I thought, I've been through this whole health journey myself, and I've been none the wiser, because I haven't listened. And so helpful to listen, to hear, and as Justine says, that process of listening well, because we're at the emotional coalface in ministry. When we listen well and are able to get these tools and handles and open the pipes up, we actually can be free, even though we go through such trial and troubled waters.